So this is LaVora Perry with my son Jared Perry Richardson, and we're doing a second interview with Veronica Bunkley. Today is May the 15th, 2014, and we're in the local history room of East Cleveland Public Library. So Veronica, the one question I had to ask is, how has racism or race impacted you personally?
Oh. Recently or in the past?
At any time.
Okay.
I mean, you can start in the past and then talk about recent.
Well, I'll start recently. I think that it's more subtle. It's more of a subtle impact than it was perhaps when I was a child. At the university where I work, we just had a diversity conference about inclusion, and it was interesting to hear that some of the minorities that are employed in that department felt a little isolated, not as a whole, but in their particular departments. And it wasn't just minority based on ethnicity, but it was somewhat of gender as well. So I feel those subtleties at my workplace. Sometimes I feel it when I'm shopping. One time I was in a department store not too long ago with my youngest daughter, and I guess maybe it was the time of day because I've been in that store many times before and never felt that I was being targeted or followed by security. And I mean, it's easy for me to recognize them having worked in retail years and years ago and knowing, that they will follow people that they deem suspicious. And so I thought about it. The only thing I could think of that would make me suspect was that I had a large purse. But then I got insulted because I thought, how stupid do you think I am that I would be here with my daughter in broad daylight knowing the technology that's available today and trying to steal something. So, it took my mind totally off what I was there for. And I wound up, doing things on purpose to annoy, or so I thought, to annoy the security person. But, and sometimes when I talk with people who are less impacted by racism and those who don't believe it exists, if I was to share that example, they would tell me I was being paranoid, or I was making something out of nothing. But I think those individuals don't understand when you've lived your life watching your role models, meaning your parents and your other family members, having to behave or be a certain way. It's a burden, an invisible burden you carry on your shoulders, and you can't shake it. If I hear one more person say, "Get over it," I could just scream. It's not something that you can get over. And the sad thing about it is someone also mentioned that the only way to eradicate racism, in their opinion, is for the old guard racists to die out. And that's depressing to me. It's depressing because I kind of believe it might be true. And it's depressing because that's part of my passion, being a diversity management professional, is working to increase awareness and working towards inclusion of people with differences. So if I was really a pessimist, it would make me think, well, what am I here for? But I'm not, so.
These are a couple of questions I had. Now, you mentioned when you were at the store, the time of day you think might have had something to do with it.
Yeah, it was a day that I was off. It was a vacation day for me, and it was like the middle of the afternoon. I had picked my daughter up from school. I think it must have been a Wednesday because that's an early day, and they get out at 1:30. So it may have been maybe 2 o'clock, 2:30 when we were in the store. And, ordinarily I'd be in, say, after work. So that would be around 6 o'clock Monday through Friday, or on a Saturday or Sunday in that particular store. But, and then I thought, okay, maybe it wasn't very crowded, but there were other customers, and I watched, and I didn't feel that they were targeted like we were.
And they weren't people of color?
No.
And regarding your workplace, you said, if I understood you correctly, that some people felt that in their department, which was were they saying in the diversity department?
No. Well, within the college, there are different departments. There's like a teacher education, curriculum foundations, the advising department, field services. There are different, segments within the college. So there were individual respondents on that particular survey that expressed feelings of isolation and not being included. And they did feel it was based on their difference, be it race or gender. So,
okay. How has racism impacted the city of East Cleveland, in your opinion?
It's interesting. I think that the city has bigger problems that expand beyond racism. But of course, I think those bigger problems are grounded in racism. There's a big economic disparity in that the residents that live here, I believe, have to go elsewhere for services that they may need, because businesses are reluctant to, make a stakehold in the community, such as, I don't believe there is a major shopping or grocery store in East Cleveland any longer. Whereas when I grew up, we had the choice between Pick and Pay, A&P, and it was another one at the shopping center near Euclid and Superior. And now the residents have to go up the hill to Cleveland Heights or University Heights, or one of the other outlying suburbs, or perhaps in Cleveland. And why is that? You have to ask yourself, why is there no major grocery store here for residents? And they're on a major, there's a major bus line. Why isn't there a grocery store on Euclid Avenue? And the only answer I can come up with is that because the population is largely African American, nobody is willing to, there's no grocery chain that's willing to invest and, serve the needs of the residents.
African American, you think poverty has anything to do with it?
Yeah, I mean that too, but it doesn't matter because poor residents buy food too, And I'm not to make an assumption about the residents of East Cleveland, but in any urban blighted locale, you're going to have people who are receiving public assistance, and they shop, they eat. So where's their grocery store? Where's the grocery store for them?
I guess my question was, do you think that's why, because of not only racism but also poverty, why a large chain hasn't taken hold?
Exactly. You'll see plenty of little, what's maybe referred to as mom and pop stores, but those are not like the major chains in terms of getting fresh produce and fresh dairy and even the fresh dry goods. And I just don't think that's. I think that the residents of East Cleveland have a basic right to fresh produce and food just like anyone else.
So how has inequality impacted you personally?
Inequality. Well, that's kind of tough because there are different levels of inequality. There's the educational inequality, gender, economic, of course, ethnic inequality. I would say that there have been assumptions made about my household's income, and I'm not sure where those assumptions come from, if they're because of my color or my style of dress or even, my social habits. But when some of my colleagues discovered where I lived and, what my husband does for a living, it was like, oh, and, like it was a surprise. And that may have something to do with my personality and that, I'm not one to be outward. I'm not an extrovert. I'm pretty introverted, but more than willing to dialogue one-on-one if someone approaches me and, is curious about me, and I can sense that they are, not inquiring for a negative reason. So I would say maybe there's been some assumptions in terms of educational inequality, where when individuals have found out that I used to be an English major and so I love poetry, and some novels deemed classics, that strikes them as a surprise too. Well, again, it's not something I'm broadcasting because, why? But whereas I wouldn't necessarily see that same assumption made about others, and it is, based on, I would say, complexion or color. So, I don't know why that should be surprising, especially in this day and age when there's so much access to information, for anyone.
How has inequality impacted the city of East Cleveland?
Well, again, with the businesses, it just seems like for most major services that other residents in communities might take for granted, you wouldn't say the same for East Cleveland residents. What happened in terms of healthcare, I think we discussed this previously on a question. The major trauma the major trauma hospital is gone from a locale where it was sorely needed, because of and not just in East Cleveland, but even in the outlying Cleveland and suburban areas where there was a lot of trauma occurring for whatever reason. That's just, so now if something happens, or even if it's a matter, something that's not traumatic, but still an ER situation, a resident has to get in his or her car and drive so many miles to be treated for that. There are clinics here, but it's, where's the ER services? If there are some available, I'm not aware.
So is there anything else you want to say on those topics? Racism, inequality?
I do, even though East Cleveland is perceived as largely a Black community, I will say that I've noticed more variety of ethnicities, driving through the city, even today on my way to this interview. And so, I think that may be an assumption on many people's part. I think that, I think that East Cleveland's plight is largely economic, And of course, it is rooted in racism, but it's beyond. And I think that people make assumptions about race based on the economic plight of the city.
Okay, well, thank you.
That's it.
Mhm.